In 1919, a reporter for the Northfield News took note of a meeting held by Mrs. Jas Forstall of the Women's Suffrage Association. The purpose of Mrs. Forstall's visit was to encourage the women of Northfield to join a newly created organization called the League of Women Voters. Mrs. Forstall described the League as a program of education and legislation which aims to improve the American electorate, first, through citizenship classes to overcome illiteracy, ignorance, and indifference to the duties of citizenship, and second, to prepare and present a legislative program to be acted upon by the League. 3 years later, the Northfield League of Women Voters was formed. This mighty political experiment grew out of the National American Woman Suffrage Association, established 30 years earlier for the express purpose of winning women the right to vote. NASA spearheaded several initiatives geared toward persuading those in power to include suffrage planks in their political platforms. For example, in 1916, 10,000 members of the association staged a pageant outside the Democratic Convention in St. Louis. With yellow sashes across their chests and white parasols in hand, demonstrators either displayed their home state's banner or knelt with shackled hands, depending on whether or not their state had already granted women suffrage. This event has since been memorialized as the Golden Lane or Walkless Parade. NASA President Carrie Chapman Catt envisioned the League as a means of finishing the fight for suffrage, which did not end with the ratification of the 19th Amendment in August of 1920. In fact, a new fight had just begun: to educate America's newly enfranchised voters. The first state leagues were formed by women in states like Minnesota, where suffrage had already been passed.
This year is a very special Women's History Month because it marks the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote.
100 years ago, the 19th Amendment became law, prohibiting states and the federal government from denying the right to vote to American citizens on the basis of sex.
The League of Women Voters celebrates 100 years at an event in Stevens Point.
This year marks 100 years of women's suffrage, and leagues across the country are celebrating. In a time of unprecedented political polarization, the League remains a beacon of good governance and grassroots activism, empowering voters of all political stripes to do their part for democracy in America.
When League started, I learned this when Brittany Rauberg and some other women were reminiscing at one of our big meetings one time in public, and they said that when League started, which was 1920, there were 3 leagues in Northfield: a Carleton one, a St. Olaf one, and a Townie one. And that's partly because people wanted to go where they could walk to, probably, because why would you, but also they're just different, probably. So that's something specific to Northfield that would not happen anywhere else at all.
I grew up in Minneapolis, and my mother was born in 1915, and so I realized that she was born just before women's suffrage came into being, and I think it was 1920 or 21. So she was always an adamant advocate for women participating in issues and politics and whatnot. So she actually paid my membership in the Northfield League for quite a few years. She was very supportive of my participation in League.
I grew up in a League family, which is sort of true. My mom was very active in League, and it was very challenging to her, but really, really important to her. And we moved many times when I was a child. I was counting up that she joined League in probably 10 or 12 different cities. It was super important to her. She and my father did not always see eye to eye politically, and so the League was a really good way to be politically active and nonpartisan and super committed.
A couple years ago, my youngest was potty trained, and I was a stay-home mom at that point, and I was like, it's time to go back out into the world, right? I have so much more time on my hands, and so I decided one way to do that would be to get involved with the local League of Women Voters.
I was in League when I was a young mother. And I was home either all the time or most of the time with a couple kids, and League was very important.
From its beginnings, the League has made it their goal to guarantee that everyone has not only the right to vote, but the ability to vote. This means providing voters with ample and accurate information regarding a wide array of local and national issues.
Our fundamental mission for the League is citizen engagement in the political process and in policymaking, and empowering citizens to have a voice, all citizens.
But at the local level, I think our primary activities are, one, to educate individuals about candidates and issues that shape our local politics, and two, to help individuals overcome any institutional hurdles that are required to cross before you can vote, specifically registering to vote.
So I feel like the League is a trusted organization in politics and in politics locally. I think people in Northfield have trusted those who've been involved with the League and trust their work now. So I think in this time when there aren't many trusted messengers for information, news, or people who are seen as neutral arbiters, trusted arbiters, the League is one, or it's as close as we can get in this time. So I think they have trust across the partisan boundary, which few organizations do.
And I think one of its real strengths, and what certainly appealed to me as somewhat of a generalist, is that it looks at a variety of issues, but I think it's also really beneficial to have an organization that approaches a variety of different issues, be it natural resources or healthcare or campaign finance or just all kinds of things from a sort of an intelligent, informed perspective.
One of the League's defining characteristics is its nonpartisanism. As stated in their bylaws and on the national website, the League is proud to be nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties at any level of government, but always working on vital issues of concern to members and the public.
And I think that Northfield's League has a reputation in town for being well informed, for trying to be relatively balanced in their approach both to issues and to political campaigns, so that and we claim that we're nonpartisan, meaning that we don't side with one party or another, but we are political in that we are very interested in and engaged in political, social issues.
And we've been very, very deliberate and have deep integrity about staying nonpartisan and really trying to have League events not to be related in any way to campaigns or to political parties.
Welcome, everyone. I am Melanie Fries, Voter Service Chair of the League of Women Voters of Northfield and Cannon Falls. Welcome to all, and thank you for coming. We will start the candidate forum in a couple of minutes, but before we do, we have a few requests and announcements to make. We ask that no campaign buttons or t-shirts be worn in this room and that no signs or literature be distributed. Campaign literature is available on a table outside this room.
Grassroots activism has been the cornerstone of the League's work from its earliest days. But the League has not always been able to find the people it needed to do the hands-on work of democracy. After 30 years of growth, the Northfield League began to decline in the 1950s.
Apparently after World War II and into the 50s, the League was perceived as being kind of leaning pink, if not slightly red, during the McCarthy era, so it sort of went underground. Apparently never really completely died out from stories that I've heard, but it sort of assumed a much lower profile.
Primary source evidence obtained by the Minnesota Historical Society suggests that the issues leading to the League's disbandment were more internal. According to a 1950 report exchanged between members of the State League, the Northfield chapter was struggling with organizational issues, including low turnover rates among the leadership. In 1953, the Northfield League was officially disbanded. In a membership list from 1955, Northfield no longer appears.
And then the McCarthy era passed, thank heavens, and people like Jane McWilliams and Molly Werlin, Georgiana Campbell, came to town in the late 50s, early 60s. All three of them I can think of were wives of college faculty. And so here are these incredibly bright women. They've had a lot of experience in other places, and they decided to pull the league back up by its bootstraps.
During the mid-60s, there was a real influx of hiring in Northfield. The colleges were hiring, a lot of companies were hiring, and these people are all moving to Northfield. A lot of us lived out in the apartments across from Dairy Queen. That was the only place you could find to live in Northfield if you just lived here. And with all this hiring came many wives who had accompanied their husbands to their jobs in Northfield, who were college educated and were kind of slowly losing their minds because they had nothing to do but take care of your kids. And someone, Molly Werlin, I think, saw it as a right opportunity to begin a league in Northfield, and she was absolutely right. One of our friends, and somebody might remember who, had her college diploma above the washing machine. She had to look at it to remember, yeah, I can do something, more than just wash clothes and take care of our kids.
So when did you join the league? When you first came to Northfield? Or had you been a member?
There was no league when I first came to Northfield. And I was shocked.
Uh-huh.
Because I just grown up with, there's always a league.
And, in the beginning, there was League of Women Voters.
And sometimes when we came to Northfield, I just assumed that there'd be a league here, and there wasn't.
So what did you do?
Well, I think it was Jane McWilliams who was a key person.
Mm-hmm.
And she and I did something, but I'll be darned if I remember. Jerry will find out, though.
Right.
In 1965, the local league was resurrected with Jane McWilliams as president. However, it would take another 2 decades before the league was firmly back on its feet. During the 1980s, the demographics of the American labor force were permanently transformed as women took and held jobs in the public sector at unprecedented rates. Data obtained by the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows us how in 1970, female participation in the labor force peaked at ages 20 to 24 due to the constraints of marriage and motherhood. Some women returned to the labor force later in life, evidenced by the M-shaped curve on the graph, although this was not the norm. Over time, the M has given way to a smoother curve as women's participation in the labor force became increasingly consistent. Today, the number of women working outside the home resembles that of men. These national trends were mirrored in Northfield, with disastrous results for the local league. As a member of the Minnesota State League wrote in 1982, this was the decade of the vanishing volunteer. New opportunities were opening up for women, which meant they had less time to give to their local leagues.
It was thriving in the 60s and into the 70s. And then in the 80s, as is often true with organizations, volunteer organizations, they kind of ebb and flow depending on leadership and energy and what else is going on. By the early 80s, the membership had begun to fall away. And the board was down to about, like 3 or 4 people. It was a pretty skeletal board.
Women began working outside the home. They weren't eager for conversation as much as they were back in the middle 60s. Our membership, I checked with Margie because I thought it might not be true, but our membership dropped to 7 members. And Margaret was president then. And we thought, okay, we either dissolve or we do something about it.
I just remember I sat down with Molly Werlin and we talked about it. And so she'd been, she was like 15 years my senior and had been one who had resurrected in the 60s. And, the question was, can you do it again? And so we decided in her living room that we would work on several issues that were quite hot in Northfield at that time. We would co-chair the board as kind of co-presidents and just start pulling people in regardless of their league affiliations.
It was when you and I took the league board in the late 80s. Remember when we kind of pulled this maverick board together,
Yes.
much
Yes.
to the consternation of the state board and the state staff. Because remember,
Why were they upset?
well,
at that
I
point?
remember we sat down in your living room
Yes.
because the league was falling apart. I think we
Yeah.
had like 3 board members left. The membership was way down. And Peggy Thompson, who was kind of the local service person, came and sat with this ragged remnant.
Just the 2 of us, or
No, there were a few others there.
Yeah.
And we were trying to brainstorm about how we might resurrect this league because it had real merit, but not the energy. And you and I kind of looked at each other across the living room, and we proposed a co-presidency in Peggy Thompson.
Never heard of that.
And we just sort of nodded. And then we proposed that we were just going to start inviting people that we knew were experts in certain areas to join the board, whether they were league members or not. We didn't care at that point. We just needed energized, intelligent people working together.
And it wasn't.
She wasn't happy with that at all.
As co-chairs of the league board, Molly and Margaret effectively revived the Northfield chapter for the second time.
I showed Molly a photograph that I unearthed as I was looking for other photographs this summer of the 2 of us standing in the assembly room at the UCC church. And it was as we were finishing up our year as co-presidents, which the State League came to accept and actually appreciate. This was actually a good working
taught them
model.
something, didn't
exactly.
we? Yes.
So we were presented with a mug with, I think, flowers in it or something. I still have the mug, some league imprinted item. And I'm holding the mug kind of like this, and Molly's really looking as though she wished she had the mug. It was hard to know how to split this mug in 2 and still make it work.
Weren't there flowers in it? So you could have had the flowers?
Yeah, but they didn't last the way the mug has.
So it's changed a lot in that they used to have, they would talk about having league meetings during the day when kids were in school, because the women didn't have jobs and they could get together. So timing of meetings has had to change quite a bit because the vast majority of league members now, I believe, work or have worked.
I think the league has such a venerable history that, and it's such a good idea that it's hard to let something like that go. But the fact that the league rose out of the suffrage movement in the 20s kind of put it on a almost sacred ground right there. The fact that it was an organization to educate, inform, and advocate that women become politically engaged. I mean, how can you argue with that?
While the Northfield League was able to revive itself for a second time, declining membership remained a concern for state and local leagues across the country. In search of a solution, some members proposed that men be allowed to join the league.
An agenda item that took the main stage was, should men be allowed to be members of the League of Women Voters?
There was a lengthy, agonizing debate about, the League of Women Voters seemed to be excluding men, or it seemed too gender specific. And what do we do about that?
The debate was very interesting and hot. And actually, I believe that I went to that convention with the approval of the board, excuse me, to vote no. Because I think there were so many of us that were not ready for that. We were not, there were a lot of people whom we believed would not feel free to express their opinions, and the give and take just would not have been successful, and therefore it was defeated. I think the next year it was approved, or a couple of times after that.
And the decision was to keep the name, but to open the membership to whomever. So men and women are members of the League of Women Voters.
In 1974, the League agreed to open its membership to men with a vote of 969 yeses to 433 noes.
Well, you know, we didn't want to be discriminating against men, and we thought that it would make us, I think this is somewhat before, I mean, it was when I came here, so I don't know, but I have an idea that it seemed like it would make us less frivolous and less left-wing and unrealistic and dreamy and, you know, all those things women are, that you have to be careful about.
But one of the most vivid experiences was one that I had with a gentleman in the checkout line at a restaurant. Some of the members had gone, and we were checking out, and he engaged me in conversation. He's right behind me, and he asked, "Are you with this women's group that's here in Atlanta? And where do you come from? Do you have a family?" Whatever. And so I conversed and told him I had 3 children. The youngest was 2. And he says, "Well, why aren't you at home taking care of your children?" And before I could get my head around that question, he said, "You know, I have a son who's 2 years old, and I certainly hope he doesn't marry your daughter." And I said, I just blurted out, I said, "I don't think there's a chance in the world of that."
I do just wonder if the League had a different name, do you think it would have this reputation that it does?
Like if it was League of Voters, just for example, or League of Women and Men Voters or something like that. It's so hard to imagine because here I'm going to reveal my true colors. The sexism in the world is so deep that if we said women and men voters, people would think, oh, it's women. You'd have to say men and women voters to make it sound even possible. And even that would be like, what do you mean? Why do you have to say women? You know? And that's just deep, deep, deep sexism. And it's just poison, you know.
Probably at some point it's going to have to change. When I was on the board and more active than I am at this moment, whenever I spoke in public about it, I would say League of Women Voters, which is open to men, and lots of men are members. You know, I would always add the caveat. Now, of course, when we're in an era of gender bending and lack of gender binaries, I just think we're going to probably need to aim at something more inclusive over time. But I think it was really important for women to say, we now vote, we have a voice, we are smart enough to study issues and know what we're talking about, and therefore this kind of organization really enabled that to happen.
While the League underwent significant changes in its first 80 years, its mission and values have remained the same since its founding: to improve democracy, empower voters, and support participation at all levels of government.
One of the most important things the League does in this community is to introduce candidates to voters.
It's a basic thing that community members need accurate information to make good decisions about our political leaders. They need opportunities to be in relationship with our political leaders, to see them in action, to hear what they're saying, how they're responding to different questions.
There's a lot of informational costs associated with elections. You have to go and research the candidates and understand what the issues are. And these costs are minimized a lot for federal level elections where there's millions of dollars spent on campaign advertisements, and there's groups mobilizing, and there's just there's fewer candidates to pay attention to. But when you go down on the ballot and look at local races, there's not as much information out there, or it's harder to find that information. Yes, you're in a smaller community, and so you might be able to find it by communicating with someone else through conversation. But what if the people in your network don't really follow politics? All of a sudden, where do you get the information? And in this area, providing information and educating voters, the League provides amazing work with its forums and meet and greets. We regularly provide nonpartisan forums where community members can gather, ask questions of the candidates, and it's conducted in a very open and equal, fair manner.
I'm Adrienne Falcon, president of the League of Women Voters of Northfield and Cannon Falls. I would like to welcome you to the School Board Candidate Forum. We thank the candidates and the audience for attending today, and our future internet audience for viewing and becoming informed on the election.
I'm running for re-election because I have a record of helping others get things done and because there's a lot more to do. But first, let me thank the League of Women Voters for holding this candidates forum. This is a very good idea. I don't know anybody else who does this, and candidate forums promote good government. So thank you.
We have struggled over the years when we make political candidates and they don't all come. Do we move forward with the forum? And we finally have decided that as long as everyone is invited with enough time, then it is not responsible not to. Because if someone is opting not to participate, then that is their choice to not have their voice heard.
1990 was when Paul Wellstone challenged Rudy Boschwitz for the U.S. Senate. And I was on the state board then, and we had signed up, both of them, for a debate. We called them debates then because there were just two people. Now they're candidates forums, I always forget to call them that, but this was a debate. And Rudy Boschwitz had signed on, Paul Wellstone had signed on. We had WCCO signed on, we had a location, and at the last minute, Rudy Boschwitz called and said, I can't come. I'm in DC and I've got too many important things to do on the floor of the Senate. Well, deep down we think he really didn't want to debate Paul Wellstone. We weren't sure, but we had to accept what he said. So we got Paul and the executive director of the State League and the State League president and the voter service person. We got on a plane and flew to DC. Oh. And the National Press Club offered to host us. Wow. And so we took the debate to DC and we could not get out of it.
Senator Rudy Boschwitz of Minnesota, the Republican nominee, and Paul Wellstone, his Democratic challenger, met for their first debate of the campaign season at the National Press Club here in Washington, D.C. This event was sponsored by the Minnesota League of Women Voters.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this 1990 senatorial debate. I'm Beverly McKinnell, president of the League of Women Voters of Minnesota. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization open to all citizens. The League does not endorse or oppose candidates or political parties. Tonight's event is between independent Republican Rudy Boschwitz and DFLer Paul Wellstone.
I'm Minnesota. Let me thank KMSP and let me thank the League for this debate. I do want to point out that I had to travel all the way here to Washington, D.C. to debate with Rudy since he did not want to come to Minnesota. As many of you know, in Minnesota, I've been looking for Rudy for a long time. I just didn't think I would have to come to Washington. And Rudy, I can see why you might not have wanted to come home given your role in this budget mess, your proposal to cut Medicare benefits, and at the same time insisting that taxes not be raised for wealthy people. Turning to the Middle East, I think that the president's decision was the correct one.
Candidate forums are just one example of how the League supports community education and engagement in Northfield. The League has also hosted news programs for radio and television, conducted year-long studies on a wide range of issues such as mental health, land usage, and gun control, and written social studies curriculum for elementary and middle school students.
In the probably late 80s, early 90s, the League sponsored a weekly cable television program called Face to Face, and I was the kind of the host, so-called, and a lot of League members became very adept at running cameras during that time. but we would, our intent was to kind of get behind the headlines of local politics. So once a month we would interview someone from the city council. Another week we would interview someone from the county commissioners board. The third week we always interviewed someone from the school board. So trying to find out from individual decision makers how they arrived at those decisions, how they kind of sifted through the information that they had to come to the headlines that most other people just saw as a fait accompli in the newspaper. That proved to be a fairly successful program in terms of informing the community of local issues and what was behind some of the decisions that were being made.
We used to do these in-depth studies. You know, local leagues would look at something like, are there enough daycare centers in our community? And they would find out, and you couldn't do it online, so it was hard work, you know, and then they would look at the league position from the last time.
In '91, I was on the state board, and I kid you not, I went out to get a cup of coffee and came back and was made chairman of a social studies study, because voter turnout in Minnesota hadn't been quite as we wanted it to be. And someone said, how can you expect voter turnout to be good if kids aren't educated about grassroots involvement and how to be good citizens, how to be active in a democracy? So we need to write a curriculum for high school kids to make them more involved citizens. And League can't write a curriculum. We don't know anything about writing a curriculum, but we can raise money. And so General Mills gave us a huge grant, and we hired curriculum writers and who knew what they were doing. And they wrote a curriculum called We've Got the Power. And it's excellent. And the State Board of Education sent it out to every school in the state, so they all had access to it. And then before we knew it, it started going out to other states in the country. And they asked us to do a workshop on it at the National Convention because people wanted to know about it. And then, before we knew about it, it started to go internationally. And it was being used in Russia and South Africa and all sorts of countries. And then Panama wrote us and said, would you mind doing it in Panama Spanish for us? So we got a grant and we had the whole curriculum redone in Spanish, and they used it a lot. And then someone said, 7th to 12th grade is too late to do this. You gotta get this when they were little. Bondage in the city, they're not in your head, yes. So we raised more money, and we hired elementary curriculum writers, and they wrote this one for little kids. And it went out. And it's just sitting around a table having coffee and saying, Minnesota should have better voter turnout than we're doing. And you get a group of people together, and this is what happens.
The league, I think, decades ago, they made this kind of democratic citizenship curriculum for, I think, elementary schools, and I was just really amazed by how it broke down, I guess, just kind of seemingly daunting structures of the political system into digestible parts for the teachers as well as the students. There were like suggestions for activities and things like that, and that was such a crazy contrast with the kind of civic education that I went through as a kid in Malaysia. And so that was something that I knew that I wanted to kind of bring back and talk to people in my circles about.
Letter writing is another way in which the League demonstrates and promotes political engagement in Northfield.
So we meet together every third Saturday of each month, and we take on a different issue each one of those Saturdays. Help me remember what we've written on, Janet. We've written on the climate, we've written on the ERA, what else have we written on? Voter registration, equal rights amendment, both statewide and the national affordable housing. So we're always writing on issues that the League supports. Today we are writing to a list of people in the state who have responsibility for this, and then we're writing to the governor's office. And our representatives in this area are, for the House, it's Todd Lippert, and for the Senate, it's Dre Hunt. And so we're writing those three offices in particular today.
How many letters are you expecting to write today?
We had 51 postcards, I believe, and there are 3 left, so I think we'll get through all 51.
Just want to say that this really does make a difference. What do legislators notice? Yes, they do notice. They track all of this. I've been lucky enough to be in the process of putting a stack of letters on the desk of a member of Congress in Washington, D.C., and they really do notice.
As successful as the League has been, it is not without its challenges.
It was really rocky when I was president, and I didn't make it any better. And I don't know how much to tell you since you're putting this on public television. People had an idea that League was very left-wing, and that was frustrating to people like me. Since I came here, my last experience in League had been so bipartisan, and it seemed like all of our positions were ones that had once been nonpartisan or Republican, even, like a path to citizenship for immigrants, and funding education. I think the League has tried and squirmed and wiggled and wrestled to not be partisan, but it's super hard to do it. But like immigration, we're not talking about a path to citizenship now. We're talking about not putting children in prisons, But most of the positions that we have are ones that used to be middle of the road and aren't. But the people in League are, at least here, are leaning liberal for sure. But that's the town too, so.
Right. Honest to say, the League has moved more toward more members being identified with one political party than another. And it's not something most League members really want to acknowledge, particularly because we take such pride in being nonpartisan.
You can't pick a party and support it, and you can't pick a candidate and support it. But at this time in our history, so many issues are attached to particular parties that whole question becomes ever more challenging. And so how do you hold a space where you create space for dialogue? That act in and of itself becomes radical in this particular moment. So I think there's a tendency to see the League as being of one political stripe, but I would actually argue that if we can hold that middle space, that is also a really radical thing for us to be doing.
While some see the League as a partisan organization, others criticize the demographics of its membership.
I do worry a little that the League here, and maybe the League nationally, is perceived in some ways to be people who are highly educated, and that can be problematic perhaps for some folks in some corners of the community to engage. I think we're working to make that not be the case, but it is, I think, part of the perception.
Well, it isn't, it's vanilla, there aren't any black and brown people in League. And that's Northfield. I don't think that's true anywhere else.
I think sometimes Leagues are perceived as being kind of older white women, and I don't think that's the case at all anymore. So I think that's something that people need to be aware of. Just within the past few years, I think that there's been a change in leadership. Certainly Adrienne Falcone is one example of a younger member who kind of approaches how to reach out to people differently, which I think is extremely beneficial. She's involved college students more. And I think younger professional women are joining.
Serving as the president of the local league has been an incredible opportunity for me to get to work with wonderful people of all ages. For me, at least, when I first became involved, I was younger than many of the league leadership. And so to learn from them and to see folks who had been doing this work for a long time and to appreciate what it means, long trajectory of people, but women in particular, who have done work in the world, and to sort of feel like I'm joining that flow of the work. And then as president, to be able to work to continue that flow of the work and bring in and continue to understand the importance of public participation.
There are times when I registered someone who this like young woman who had just turned, like, she was about to turn voting age, and I was like, oh my god, let's register you. And we like had a great time, like great fun registering to vote. And I was like, oh my god. And I was like, check your email. And she checked her email and she got her registered to vote. And I was like, look at you, you're all registered to vote. And I think there is something about like being a friendly face to help like demystify like voter registration. Like there's something empowering to knowing that like someone will help you, it's not that hard. You're capable of doing it yourself. All this information is available to you on your Secretary of State's website. Like I think that's, even if momentarily, it's empowering. And I don't think it's limited to gender or like class or race in that sense, because we're registering, like, we try to register everyone to vote who wants to be, and like think about like pretty like different places to register people.
Those who are a part of League benefit from the organization as much as the people they serve. While the League does not focus specifically on empowering female citizens, it prepares its members to succeed in other governmental roles by building their competence and confidence.
A number of League members have been on the city council, they've been on the school board, they've been county commissioners. So League turns out to be a pretty good springboard for becoming involved in politics. To say it's a way for younger people to sort of see how leadership works well.
The League being it was just such a vibrant organization that's so committed to the ideal of democracy, that was something I really didn't experience at all when I was back home. Malaysia underwent like a really kind of dramatic democratic transition the summer of 2018. So in May, we, for the first time, had a change in government. So for the first time, there was a different political party that won the elections, and it was really historic in many ways, because I think I myself, growing up under like the semi-authoritarian government, never thought that it would possibly happen. I saw really the League as just a lot of opportunities for me to learn more about how citizens can get involved in, democratic governance in the country. And so, yeah, I decided that the way in which the League engages voters, I think is really impressive. How they so systematically have, resources packets that are really aimed to eliminate the barriers for voters to make informed decisions. I think that's a level of organization that I really hope to one day see in Malaysia's political landscape. Yeah.
And it turned out that the League was a great introduction into people in the community who were very engaged, and also a way to kind of figure out how the community worked, both kind of socially and politically. And that's one thing I really like about Northfield, is it's small enough that you actually know the city administrator, or you know the mayor. And if you have an idea, you can go to those individuals with a proposal, and they know who you are. It's very gratifying, because you can actually make a difference as an individual, because you're not just some nameless person kind of knocking on City Hall's door. You can actually talk to somebody. And I like local politics for that reason.
And it's like everyone good in Northfield is on the board, and so it's just good to like, and it feels very good to know what's going on outside of Carleton, and like these like just be around like very powerful women who all have doctorates or just have like are experts in their field and worked very like hard all their life and are like really committed to doing good. It's like, wow, amazing.
Another thing the League does give us is some fun and some friendships. We've done some creative things. We have periodically new member orientation times, and it's at somebody's home, and it's people all bring goodies, and we're most of us good cooks, and we have wine and can engage in. I do meet people I wouldn't otherwise meet.
So when I think about, what the League has given me, it has given me a broader sense of community and a sense of impact and capacity to act in the world, right? So at this point, I see our democracy as seriously threatened by many different factors. And that can be paralyzing. And the League has given me, and I think other members, a way to move beyond that paralysis and to say, okay, I may not be able to tackle it all, but through this organization, I can write a letter this month. Through this organization, I can, that I'm working to have the census filled out. Through this organization, I can figure out how to motivate people to get out and vote.
Many people, at that time, especially when opportunities were more limited, it was so important to have something to do with your mind, and so that was really good. But I think now the idea of being in league together is just a wonderful feeling, especially for the young women, I think, that are on the board now. And that that we all feel stronger by our connections with one another.
I recently found a letter I'd written in '73 to my Cornell advisor, which essentially said, "League saved my sanity and provided the stimulation I missed from graduate school." As the League president here in 1971 and '72, the most vivid memories, honestly, are the board meetings. There were 16 board members, each with a portfolio. And they were such dedicated, bright, energetic people, women.
It's been a great organization that's done great work for a long, long time, and that work is continuing.
And I feel like having such a rich history grounded on this amazing situation where women who are disenfranchised came together and made their voices heard is inspiring. And to have that at the heart of an organization adds passion and motivation, and it gives us something looking back to look forward to. Like, how can I take the situations and the landscape that I have inherited, and what can I do to work with other people, and together what can we achieve, right? And that's inspiring. I think it's worth celebrating.